Howdy folks, this is Just Joe at Metcalf Mills, bringing you Story Time Tuesday on an old drizzly cold day up here today at the foot of Chestnut Mountain. On today's Story Time Tuesday, I want to talk about food preservation. That's been something very important for a long time to families and survival, especially like my family. They come in here almost 200 years ago, and they had to know how to survive or we wouldn't be here. And food preservation was a big part of that. And they done a lot of drying meats, and they had dry apples and stuff like that, mostly out in the sunshine because they didn't have no other way to dry them. Well, another thing they done was hang them up in the house. Sometimes they'd hang them up upstairs in the attic if they had a attic, and I've heard a lot about old people drying food that way. And another big important thing they done was pickling. Before they had canning jars, pickling was one of the main ways to preserve their food. And what they'd do is put their food, most of the time it'd be beans or corn. They'd make kraut out of cabbage. And they'd put that down in they'd pickle a lot more stuff than that. Beets and probably, if they had cucumbers, they made pickles, and they pickled a lot of stuff like that in crocks. And the way they'd do it was they would cook their food. Some of it they cooked, some of it they didn't, and put it in a crock, and they'd layer it with salt. They'd put a little salt in the bottom of the crock, put a layer of the food in there, and sprinkle a little more salt and a layer of food, and come on up like that. And then they'd put so much water in it, and we may get into doing some of that later on this year, maybe, hopefully. I know I'm going to do some of it, and if I do, I'll make a video about it. And they'd pickle beans and corn and make kraut out of cabbage, and they'd put it in them crocks and put water in there up over the top of it. Then they'd put them a rock or a plate or something right on top to hold the food down in the salt water, in the brine. Hold it down so it didn't come to the top and float and dry out and ruin. And they'd usually tie a rag over top of these crocks, just drape a cloth over it and tie a string around that and keep it sealed off good. Some crocks had some nice lids to them, but most of the time people just tie a rag over it. And they'd put them crocks in the Springhouse where it was nice and cool. And that cool water running through that Springhouse in the spring box, it kept that Springhouse cool. And most Springhouses was down in the ground because that's where the spring was. You had to go down in the ground to where the spring water was coming usually out of the rocks. You go down to where it's coming out of the rocks, and then they'd form it up and make them a trough there, and they'd use that trough of water running to set their milk and their butter down in that water in a vessel. And that cold water running all the time, it would keep that milk and that butter cool and keep it from ruining. And it also cooled the Springhouse. And that's what helped their crocks stay cool, to keep that stuff that they had pickled. And I've heard my family talk about it. Aunt Ruby, if you've seen my earlier videos, you heard about Aunt Ruby. She's the one that saved Daddy's life when he was born. If you ain't seen that video, you need to go back and hunt it up. I don't know right off what number it is. I'm not good at putting cards up and stuff yet, but I'll get better one day. Make it easier for you to find this stuff I'm talking about. I've heard Aunt Ruby talk about her mother especially. They didn't have canning jars, and she cooked on the fireplace 3 meals a day. No cook stove, just iron pans and pots, probably not many of them, and she cooked on the hearth on the fireplace with coals. That's how she done it. And Aunt Ruby said that their Springhouse had a bunch of crocks sitting in there. all the time, full of stuff that she had pickled. And Aunt Ruby said they'd just go in there and take a cover off of them crocks, dip out ever how much beans or whatever they wanted for the meal, put the cover back on it, and take it to the house to eat. And it was a good way of preserving food. They didn't have to worry about nothing. I mean, it was pretty much free preservation. A little bit of salt they had to buy, and the cool water kept it cool. And then later on, when canning jars come in, everybody got canning jars. And the first old canning jars that I've seen, they had a they had a zinc lid on them, like a metal zinc lid, and it was one piece. And that zinc lid had a ceramic inside of it, and they had a rubber gasket that they would put on the top of the jar and put that zinc lid down on there, and that would allow them to be able to get that jar to seal. And now we got it real easy with bands and flats canning. It's real easy, but they had to use them old zinc lids and them rubber gaskets to can their stuff. And I imagine that was a lot harder. They might have lost some and who knows what, but there might have been some other different kind of canning lids, but that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I've seen. And of course, this time of year, it's springtime a lot of places, and it's going to be springtime here before long. And have you started any little seedlings of what you want to eat this year? Right now's the time to do it if you're going to do it, and it's maybe past time in a lot of places. It's getting close to past time here on a few things. And it'll be time to start planting seeds in the ground before long. Have you thought about growing something to eat this year? Have you thought about raising a garden? If you got a lot of grass and you ain't got no garden spot, that grass needs to go, and you need to start growing some food to eat out there in that yard, in that backyard or that front yard, whatever you got. You need to do that. It don't take a lot of space to make a lot of food. If you do it right, and you figure out your practice, and you can grow a lot of food in a decent space. You might ought to consider that if you've not already. And if you got a few canning jars, you can put you up some food for the next winter and have something dependable that you can count on, and you know it's going to be there no matter what. And I've got a few canning videos on my channel, and there'll be more to help you to along with you canning. And there's a lot of other sources too. There's a lot of other good channels that has a lot of different ways of doing things on them. And we like to can meat, pork, beef, or deer meat. We like to can that. It's really good, and it'll keep a long time. I've got some sausage that I found that I canned the winter of '09. The winter of 2009 is when I canned this sausage. And the reason I've still got it is I took the jars and I put them in an old cheese box, and I had them set back, and I forgot about them. And I found them here, I think it was last year sometime, and I had about 8 or 10 quarts of sausage that I canned in 2009. And that stuff looks just as good as it did. You can open it up, and that sausage is, to me, it's better now than it was then. It's just, I don't know if it's aged or what, but it is so good. So meat, I mean, you can keep and keep and keep. As long as that lid don't rust out on you, you'll be good. And another way of preserving meat is to salt it down or smoke it. Now my family always done the salt method. They had a smokehouse, and I've got a smokehouse, and you got a big table down one side of it. And the way you do that, when you butcher a hog, you let it cool off real good, and then whatever cuts of the hog that you want to salt cure, you put a layer of salt down on your table. I usually put some cayenne pepper and black pepper, ground cayenne pepper and black pepper. I just put that all over with the salt, and then I put my piece of meat down. A lot of times we'll be salt curing Midlands and fatback, and we'll put that down on that salt, skin side down, and then we'll just cover it up with more pepper and salt, and just cover it over with salt, and it'll take that salt in, and you give it 2 or 3 weeks and come back and kind of break that salt. That salt will get kind of real brickly hard, and it'll kind of draw away from the meat, and you take that brickly salt off, and then put you another little layer of salt on it again, and then you're good. It'll stay right there for a long time. Hams, on the other hand, if you're going to salt cure hams, you have to do a little bit different because they've got a bone in them. You got to be real careful with that, but you have to clean back away from that bone and pack that salt down in there as best you can. And you have to, what I like to do is stand them hams up with the shank down, and it lets anything in there drain out real good. I usually leave them for a day and come back the next evening or something, and if the weather's cool enough, let them drain, and then I'll lay them down on that salt bed and then pack that salt around them real good and let it get brickly, and take it off and put more salt on them. And the hams, I like to put extra salt because they're bigger, and you don't want to let them ruin, and you got to take good care of them. Then you can just go in the smokehouse anytime you want to and cut you off, break that salt back. After about 8 or 10 weeks, you pretty much cured, and they'll keep right on from there. But you break that salt back, and you can cut you a piece of ham off or a piece of middling and use it to season your beans and fry your taters in and your greens, and man, it's good eating. I tell you what, it's good. These things that I'm talking about, I hope to be able to share all that with you. I didn't get to put a whole lot on there last year. It was kind of hectic the last half of the year when I got my channel going, and there's a few things that I didn't get to do last year, but this year I'm hoping to do better and do some of these things, and I want to share them with you, and I'm looking forward to it. So if you got a little space and you need to think about, for sure, growing you a little food this year, and if you've never done that, try it. You ain't got nothing to lose, and you got a whole lot to gain. Just try that. There's plenty of good instructions on how to do and what to do. People that's got experience, and they can help you a lot, and I'll have different things on my channel here to help you along, and I'll show you what little bit I know about this and that. But for us, our garden and our canning and pickling and curing, that's a big part of what we eat. I mean, for the most part, we live at home. We got our gardens and put up as much as we can, and we've got a lot of beans and stuff left from last year, and it's good to have on hand. Once you get, it's a lot of work to get it canned, but when you get it canned, all you got to do for a meal is just open up a few jars and whatever else you're going to have with it. Make a pan of cornbread, and you're ready to go, and it don't take a long time to prepare it. It's really, you invest some time and energy into it, and then you can do better later. And I really like it in the summertime when you can, if you want a meal like that, you can have it without having to do so much cooking and heating the house up so much. I hope this video encourages you to grow you some food and do and learn. And when you get the harvest that first bit of stuff and taste how good it is, well, you'll just be happy all over. Well, this is Justro at Metcalf Mills. I appreciate everybody, and I look forward to seeing y'all soon.